Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your lead analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by managing editor Ross Binder here on this Wednesday morning. Before we get started, make sure you subscribe Thursday morning. Damn
Thursday.
it. Now, here on this Thursday morning. The days run together right now, Ross. We were just talking about it. Between
It
basketball and
is.
football season, oh gosh.
It is our craziest time of the year, no doubt. So yeah.
Uh-huh. Here on this Thursday morning, joined by my girlfriend Golden Doodle. Hopefully that didn't get picked up on the mic, but occasionally you might hear some barking in the background, so apologies for that. But before we get started on this Thursday morning, make sure that you subscribe there on YouTube. Drop a like, drop a comment. Let us know what you're thinking about Iowa men's basketball, women's basketball, football. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So go ahead and do that. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave that rate and review. It helps out a lot. And make sure you hit subscribe so you're not missing an episode. As it is that crossover season, we're going to be talking about all three football, men's basketball, women's basketball. But of course, we got to start with football right now. Being the bye week, I mean, I wrote about it early this week, Ross. Still question marks on offense and on defense for that matter. More so, who's going to be playing quarterback for
I
for
was it really seems like an extremely well-timed bye week for Iowa because they don't have a game on Saturday because it does not sound like Cade McNamara or Brendan Sullivan would likely be available at quarterback on Saturday, and Jay Higgins is a very big question mark at linebacker if they had a game on Saturday. So it really does seem like this was a very opportune week to have a bye, and yeah, hopefully all or at least most of those guys are back when Iowa goes out to Maryland next weekend.
yeah. You mentioned Higgins, and I'm writing that on the outline right now. I forgot to include that, but did write about it yesterday.
Yep.
It's almost flying under the radar in my mind just because of how much of a mess the quarterback situation is. Like you didn't have Cade for multiple weeks. He wasn't going to. I don't think he went to class a couple days because of the concussion, which I'm assuming is normal. That's fairly typical for a concussion. I've never experienced one, so but it's that plus a sprained ankle for Brendan, plus the broken thumb for Marco, plus James Rezar is no longer a quarterback,
He's hurt.
and he's hurt. So you've got your fifth string, fourth string, people have been calling it differently. I think to us it was always fourth string. He was ahead of Rezar, but he's your only quarterback who has gotten through. Jackson Stratton is the only one who's gotten through unscathed this entire season. We've talked about health being an issue consistently, and that's just football to some degree. But last year, it was the entire offensive line and Caleb Johnson and pieces of the defense. Oh, Cooper, obviously, going down. That was a big one.
That's a huge one.
Eric All, Luke Lachey.
Lachey, yeah. I mean, the
And
offense
now,
was, a hospital,
right.
last year. It was bad.
And now the entire quarterback room is like a hospital.
Yeah.
It's like a ward or something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I like this, like you mentioned, this bye week couldn't have come at a better time just for them to kind of sit, you know? I'm sure they're doing film stuff. I'm sure they're getting work in
Yep.
on the field, but to just have some time to recover. But I mean, I don't know if you were able to listen. Obviously, you edited my article, Ross, but what Tim said on Tuesday was like, I don't know who's going to play quarterback. I don't know who's going to be available. The only somewhat constant or consistent availability right now is Jackson Stratton. And he is a walk-on transfer from Colorado State who had previously gone 4 of 17 for a touchdown and 2 interceptions with the Rams, previously committed to Washington State, a 3-star recruit for us. Of course, we've got all that information on Rivals when he committed this summer. So,
And he's a guy that's just been doing scout team stuff,
yeah,
earlier this season. He was a scout team linebacker, for a little bit a few weeks ago. So that is not a guy that is, up to speed with the Iowa offense or well versed in that offense for sure.
and I think we need to give him his flowers, and I think we did a good job of this after the game on Friday too. Is I mean, considering that lack of reps, just like not even playing quarterback in practice for the majority of the season and going in and doing what he did at UCLA. No, they didn't win the game. No, he didn't lead them on that final charge and that last drive, that last possession. He missed the throw that Lester mentioned was probably his favorite throw, his favorite route to throw. But to do go out there and do what he did was impressive. Complete those two passes to Jacob Gill. Those were and shout out to Jacob Gill too, because he made a play on some not very accurate throws.
Yeah, they weren't the greatest throws, but I mean, it was third and long situations, both of them. Like they were not easy plays to convert, and Iowa needed to have them. They were down 7 at that point, needed to tie the game up, keep that drive going, and he did that. And you're right. I mean, he did that with very little experience, very little, time in the system, time with the first teamers, obviously. So yeah, I mean, that is to his credit, and yeah, it didn't have the fairy tale ending that I think we were all hoping for after after he led that time drive. It's like, oh wow, could this really have a something really special? And no, it didn't. But yeah, I agree. Definitely give him his flowers for what he did against UCLA because he came through as well as almost as well as Iowa could have hoped for. I think in that situation for what he's what they're dealing with there.
Right. You would have fans would have loved to see him lead the charge and lead them to victory, but a fourth string walk on who has barely gotten any reps, like he still really played well. But the thing is, given given what Cade McNamara has put on the field this season and Brendan Sullivan in a much smaller sample size, those three turnovers against UCLA, just trying to do way too much. Cade just largely hasn't been good this season. Couple games, he did what he needed to do. It's not like Cade coming back or Brendan coming back fixes all the problems.
No, absolutely not.
No. So you're still left. Of course, you want that depth because the last thing you want is Max White playing quarterback for
Yeah.
Iowa or Kyler Girardi. Nothing against them, but they're not quarterbacks, right? They weren't brought in to
No.
play college quarterback. So I just don't know how much this raises the floor for the remainder of the season and how much excitement can Iowa fans really have for the remainder of the season at this point with four losses? Like I think it was pretty down in the dumps after that second and third loss, more so third loss to Michigan State. But now we've reached a level of meh. I think folks have had their their misgivings with men's basketball and attendance and folks have applied some apathy to it. I'm not going to put it at that level of apathy.
No,
Not
definitely
not
not.
close because Kinnick's still sold out this whole season, right? It's going to be full against Nebraska especially. But there is a certain level of apathy now that the playoff is out of the question, right?
Yeah.
And it's just that much more with that fourth loss and the quarterback situation going forward the remainder of the season and into the bowl.
Yeah. Well, and I think, that fourth loss really was significant because, at 3 losses, Iowa still had a chance. If they run the table, 9-3 regular season, chance to get that 10th win in a bowl game. Like, I know bowl games don't mean what they used to. 10-win seasons don't mean exactly what they used to. But, for a program where I was at, that's still a really solid season, to achieve. And, that would come with a win over UCLA in the Rose Bowl. It's not the Rose Bowl game, but that's still a place where Iowa fans would have been very happy to get a win, would have, just felt good. And that's just off the table. Obviously, they lost that game, didn't get a win. Now, max you can do is 8-4 regular season, 9 win with a bowl. It's like, like you said, that's just meh. Like that's a very been there, done that. That's kind of been the baseline during the Kirk Ferentz era for a lot of the last 2 decades, especially the last, you know, 10 years or so, I would say for sure. Like that's just kind of been the floor or slightly above the floor. I mean, yeah, they've been hitting that pretty consistently. So yeah, you're just not, there's not a lot there to really get your juices flowing, which is, that's a bummer. You want to have something to be excited about every week, and especially towards the end of the season. And for Iowa right now, it's not there. And I think it really stings this year because, they had all those the seniors and super seniors and COVID guys and, just a ton of experienced returning veteran talent and guys who wanted to, come back they didn't come back to go 8-4 and go to the, you know, Outback Bowl or whatever that's Cheez It Bowl, I guess, whatever. I mean,
Relia Quest.
the Relia Quest Bowl, there we go.
Welcome to
Uh,
2024, Ross.
I miss the Outback, baby. So yeah, it's a tough one, they're gonna have to the players are gonna have to pick themselves up after this one and see what they got for the last couple games and the fan base too, to an extent, yeah, they're gonna have to decide how much they want to be invested.
Yeah, and I mean the players as well. You mentioned Jay Higgins didn't come back to go 8-4. Sebastian Castro didn't come back to go 8-4, right? Along with Nick Jackson and Quinn Schulte, and I think Phil Parker put it pretty well on Tuesday in that he said everybody expected this defense to be just as good, but it's a challenge every time you go out on the field. And Iowa got a lot of lucky bounces last year and a lot of, well, one really unlucky, swing of the arm. But those bounces aren't going to happen every year. And it's still a good defense. It's still, I think, 26th in the country in yards allowed. But like yards per play has gone up a full yard. It went from 4.1 last year to 5.1 this year. And that's a pretty indicative stat. I mean, more than that too, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think with the defense, the decline is obvious. It's there. I think what is probably most concerning to Iowa fans, and I'm sure to the coaches and the players, is, I think we've seen this defense falter against some really top level teams the last couple of years. The struggles against Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State, and that was more understandable. But this year we've seen them. Michigan State just marched them up and down the field in East Lansing last month. And UCLA, like they could not get the Bruins off the field on Friday night when they needed to. Like, we lamented that Stratton didn't have, the chance for that fairy tale ending. And that's partly because the defense couldn't give that to him. He had one drive after that. He led that game tying touchdown drive and he only had one more drive after that. And when they went 3-and-out and punted it back, hoping the defense could get a stop, get the offense another shot, and that never happened. And that's just something we have not been accustomed to seeing from that defense the last few seasons is, them not being able to get that stop, and especially not being able to get that stop against, mediocre or even worse teams. Michigan State and UCLA are not great teams. UCLA a little better than their record because of that tough schedule, but overall they're a pretty average or below average team in the Big Ten, and but they still did what they wanted on offense a lot of that game on Friday, which is that's a tough to watch.
Few more stats for you. Through 14 games last year, I'm reading from the article that I put together yesterday, and I'll put again. Recent articles. I always put them in the description for you on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, whatever. So you just scroll down and find them, so you can read the whole thing. But through 14 games last season, Phil Parker's defense allowed 282.5 yards per game and 20 touchdowns. Through 10 games this season, the defense is allowing 320.2 yards per game and has conceded 21 touchdowns. So already more touchdowns allowed this season than last season in 4 fewer games, and they're allowing about 40 more yards per game and about just just about like 3.5 more points per game as well. Points per game moved from 14.79 to 18.2. So it's so odd because you look to blame something, right? Or blame someone. And the first thing people are going to talk about is Cooper DeJean not being on the outside, right? And that's a valid point. I mean, that's an All-American we're talking about, right? Consensus All-American.
I mean, that's the guy that's, went to the NFL, and once he got healthy, he's been excellent for the Eagles this season. Like,
Yep.
they are loving him. Their fans are loving him. He has been just balling out up there. So yeah, you take a guy like that out of the Iowa defense, like that's a huge loss in itself. And then you're replacing him with it's been a revolving door there. TJ Hall, Deshaun Lee, John Nestor. It's had a tough time finding, guys that can be solid there. Deshaun Lee's been better lately, but that's been a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's kind of gone under the radar, to tell you the truth, is losing Logan Lee and Joe Evans. Joe Evans led the team in sacks last year. Logan Lee was a prototypical three tech defensive tackle at Iowa. And we didn't talk about them a ton just because they're not the big flashy names. They didn't rack up the stats, though Joe did, like I said, led the team in
I'd
sacks.
say Joe Evans, I think, led the team in sacks the
Right.
last 2 years, or maybe just last year. But
I think just last
I
year.
think just last year, he had a fair number the year before, though. Like, he was a consistent sack guy for that D line, which I think they're missing this year for sure.
Yeah. I do agree with that. Either way, they're not Cooper DeJean, right? So everybody goes to Cooper DeJean. But I think losing them, especially in the run game, is where it hurts because those two knew the defense. They knew their gap assignment. They knew what they were doing in stopping the run. So losing those two guys definitely hurts.
I also think, I mean, this is something we brought up a few times in the preseason, is that D line depth, is going to be a question mark this season. And I don't know that the answers to that question have been super favorable over the course of the season. I think, that was another factor in that UCLA loss was that D line played heavy snaps, the starters. I think they all played like season high snaps or close to it. And, I don't think fatigue was necessarily the main factor or anything, but, they're playing more, and that's a sign of Parker, and Calvin Bell just not fully trusting those backups in that situation to come in and spell guys, in those situations. And that's what we wondered. Like, does Iowa have guys that can, step in for Graves and Black for a few plays? And it's been pretty hit or miss this year, unfortunately. So,
I was just gonna say that I think the defensive ends, Brian Allen and Max Llewellyn, have largely been good.
yeah,
Those are the physical trait guys, right? And they've made some really big plays.
yeah.
But that secondary defensive tackle spot, I think it would have been better had Jeff Bowie been able to make it through camp and stay healthy. He's just a step behind everybody else. Now you're seeing Will Hubert get a lot of those snaps, and it's a walk on, right? Not necessarily his fault. It's just a situation where he's not going to have those physical tools. He's not going to have those things that allow scholarship guys generally to make plays. Jeremiah Pittman is good. Like we've always talked about him as serviceable, right? And I think that's what he is. YA Black might be the best player on Iowa's defense. He's phenomenal. Aaron
Been
Graves,
really good.
phenomenal. Both going to be in the NFL. To go to those second guys, I mean, we talked about it in the off season, right? We shared with our subscribers. A source told us that they were going to push. There was a certain contingent of the staff that really wanted a backup defensive tackle out of the portal, and they didn't go get it. So that was something that's hurting the team right now, and clearly both of our opinions. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's a big one. Mentioning Logan Lee, man, I really think that's an underrated loss. I really do.
I think you're right. He was a guy that didn't get a lot of flowers last year. And that's, like you said, like that's a pretty unsexy, it's not a flashy position that he played, but it's such a vital position. And he played it so well and so consistently that you do miss that a lot when it's not there.
Right. Now, looking at the remainder of the season, Russ, I talked about that apathy. it's really just not on. It's not who Kirk Ferentz is to quote unquote punt the remainder of the season, right? If Sullivan and Cade are both healthy, he's not just gonna defer to Brendan to get him more snaps and make him comfortable going into next season. He's very much focused on this season.
He's going to try to win every game, every week, and whatever gives he thinks gives him and Iowa the best chance to do so is who he's going to play for sure.
They're not lining up for draft picks anytime soon. I was not going to be tanking here,
We
so
can't tag for Cooper Flag, unfortunately.
yeah,
So
yeah. So with that in mind, I mean, what do you think about the remainder of the season, Ross? Like whether or not Kirk's going to do it, would you defer to Sullivan? Would you defer to some of these younger guys? Would you talk to maybe the older guys and say, "Hey, we want to keep you healthy as we head towards the NFL draft"? I again, in all reality, and I prefer to talk about reality than hypotheticals in these moments. Kirk's not going to do that. We
yeah.
I mean, I could say that blanket statement right now. But I also think this is a reflection on the new college football world because 10 years ago, 15 years ago, every single game mattered, and now these don't. You move that level of meaning and you you compress it into like the first six games, and then if you don't win, see ya next season. Let's move on. Again, it's not that way at Iowa, but okay. So, what do you think about that? Would you defer to some of the younger guys now? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I would, I think, like to see some of the younger guys get some more reps, especially, you know, no disrespect at all to Nick Jackson or Jay Higgins. They've been incredible players for the last 2 years, but their time at Iowa is coming to an end. Like they're going to be done after the Nebraska game or the bowl game. Depending on which if they play in the bowl game, I would be kind of surprised if they didn't, knowing those two guys. But either way, that's coming up pretty fast. The end. And I was going to go into next season with needing new linebackers and. It'd be good to get those guys a few more reps. We saw Harrell get thrown in against UCLA, and that was the most significant minutes he's had in like meaningful, like not, just like into the game garbage time minutes to date at Iowa. So, getting some more like live reps for the guys, I think would be really helpful in those positions. The big one though is quarterback. You mentioned it, and that is the huge one. And I would definitely go with Sullivan, and I wouldn't just defer to Sullivan because he's the presumptive starter next year, but from what we've seen this year, he's also been the more effective quarterback for Iowa and that offense. So if you're wanting to win this year and win every game left, which you are, I think he's the quarterback that gives you the best chance to do that. Did he play well against UCLA? Obviously not. He started out pretty well, and then it went downhill pretty rapidly. You mentioned it, the decision making, the turnovers were atrocious. The interceptions, the I hope the one thing he's learning over this 2 week period is learn to slide, Brendan. God, please slide. We need you, buddy. You just Iowa needs you really. They can't have you getting banged up like that. But yeah, I just think
I
he's the
mean,
more
we need you so our eyes don't bleed watching Iowa
absolutely,
football.
absolutely, yes. But yeah, I just think he's been the more effective quarterback. When he came in against Northwestern, he was good, and then obviously the Wisconsin game was great, and it's not the biggest sample size for sure, but we've seen a lot of Cade this season, and we saw some last season, and you mentioned it, just hasn't been that good, hasn't been consistent, hasn't been sharp. He's also coming to an end, and I don't know that I need to see a lot more of what he brings to the table in an Iowa uniform. But that's where I'm at. What are you thinking?
What I'll say about Cade is he's not Spencer Petras, right? Like Spencer went through it all at Iowa. And you've got a like finishing out the season with him in his final year playing was you stuck it out with us, man. You stuck it out. Cade, not so much. It's different. He hasn't earned that level of respect, and I mean, maybe not respect. That made it sound a little worse than I intended it to, but that he hasn't had that level of investment with the program, the years, right?
Yeah.
You could talk about investment in terms of like emotional investment and all that. Obviously, Cade wanted to win and all those things. I'm not trying to detract that from him at all. But in terms of years and being around the program and choosing Iowa out of high school, all those things, right? Cade doesn't have that. Um, and he hasn't played well enough to earn that starting spot either in those final few games. So yeah, I mean, my opinion, it's full on Sullivan. You say, thanks for coming here, Cade. Appreciated your time. Now we're gonna open up the budget a little bit in NIL for other guys. Now, I think I do with that in mind. I think I told premium subscribers this earlier this week, and if you want to be privy to information like this on iowa.rivals.com/subscribe, do that today. But I told premium subscribers earlier this week. I think it's going to be Cade.
I think you're right. Honestly, my pick would be Sullivan. We just talked about that,
Right.
but I understand where you're coming from with Cade, and having watched Kirk Ferentz for the last 25 odd years, like, yeah, I get it. And based on what he said this season, I said before, I think the Wisconsin game, that game and the UCLA game kind of felt like a trial period for Sullivan. Kind of a tryout. How well does he do? It was his job to win. And I think the UCLA game going badly is enough to crack the door open for Ferentz to go back to Cade if he's healthy, obviously. And that doesn't excite me. I mean, obviously, but I could definitely see it 100%.
And I mean, if Cade comes out and leads them to three straight wins, like all more
Hey,
power to
awesome.
him, dude.
I'll eat crow. We'll be eating
Right.
crow on this pod for however many weeks it takes. But
Right.
yeah, we've seen what we've seen from him this year and last year. So, it's not like we're throwing him under the bus off of one or two bad games. It's been more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's translate transfer
Transition?
switch to basketball. Let's switch to basketball here. Men's basketball. We'll start with them. Trashed all three of their opponents so far in Texas A&M Commerce, which is such a mouthful. I go to type it, I'm like, I don't like just typing Texas A&M because of the ampersand in there, but
I know
Texas
there's an
A&M Commerce.
ampersand, there's a dash. There's like, come on, there's too much going on here.
Texas A&M Commerce, Southern, and South Dakota. They won the Kenny Arnold Classic by beating all three teams there. And it's early in the season. They've had their ups, they've had their downs, they've had their health issues already with Seydou Traore missing the first two games of the season, coming back, Owen Freeman being sick. We're gonna find out if he'll be available this weekend, which hopefully going back to Moline.
I know it's a homecoming for him. It'd be a real shame if he wasn't able to play in that game.
Exactly. So he and Brock Harden getting some homecoming this weekend, which I'll be there in Moline covering the game. Looking forward to it. But with all of that and integrating the transfers, Drew Thelwell playing, Brock Harding starting, like mixing in the centers with Owen Freeman out. Lots to talk about in terms of lineup and how things are going to shake out going forward. I really, really liked the addition of Seydou Traore this offseason, and he looks exactly like what Iowa needed and exactly like what we talked about. If you're not if you're not privy to that video that's out there from his time at Manhattan, go watch it. And we've got our articles on him. If you just search Seydou Traore on Rivals and see what we had to think about the addition, I mean, it's exactly what Iowa needed. And he's not
Watch,
gonna
watch,
he's gonna
and say watch the highlights of him from the other night against South Dakota. Like he did exactly what we hoped and wanted to see. So
right.
it's great.
Right. And, relative to his first year in college basketball playing at Manhattan, The level of efficiency, I think, is going to go up dramatically for him in this first year. He's just forced to do a lot being a high major player on a low major team. Manhattan's not mid major. They're not high major. They're low major. So doing a lot there as a freshman in his first year of college basketball.
He looks like a guy that, kind of he looked a lot more comfortable. I mean, I didn't obviously watch a lot of him at Manhattan, not gonna lie. But he looks like a guy that's comfortable with more comfortable with what he's doing now. Like he's had that first year under his belt, kind of knows what the college game is like. Obviously, it's going to be a step up. We'll see when he plays some tougher competition, Big Ten opponents. But there's a lot to like in his game and how he played the other night and what he brings to this team. You've mentioned the athleticism, and it's obvious, and that's because you literally cannot miss it. If you watch him for 5 minutes, he will do something athletically. It's like, oh, that's pretty cool. I didn't know Iowa had a guy that could do that because they didn't until this year. It's been a few years at least. So
The closest thing in terms of athleticism last season was probably Tony Perkins.
I was gonna say, yeah, Tony was a good athlete, but Traore is a little bit above that for sure.
The last guy that played that similar position would be Chris Murray,
Yeah,
Keegan Murray.
yeah,
And we know what Fran and company were able to do with Keegan and Chris Murray.
yeah.
There's a lot to happen yet, a lot of time left in Seydou Traore's basketball career, but I really think he's got an NBA future if he goes on the trajectory that he's on. If not, a solid spot in the league, he's going to be playing pro somewhere. You can see it. He's also a year, but factoring into draft stock, he's also a year older because he went to prep school. So he's in his third year post high
Which
school now.
which is yet another point of comparison with him and the Murrays because
Yeah,
they were older too because they had that year down in Florida. I forget
right.
the school they were at.
They didn't go to IMG, did they?
I don't think so, but maybe I don't think it was IMG, but it
Okay.
was something down there. Yeah,
All right. Yeah. I'll look it up when you're talking about something later.
yeah.
So yeah, really like Sadie. I think, and it's not just the athleticism, the flashy stuff, the alley oop dunks. He's really good defensively, and you add him. And he's a step slow right now. I think he's getting back into game shape, and that's something he can work on going forward too. Is just the lateral quickness, but he and Josh Dix having another defender where it's like you got Josh Dix and that's it. Having another guy is really beneficial. He can guard more or less 1 through 4. And as that lateral quickness picks up, he'll be better at guarding the ones and the twos. But he was at the front of the press, and this was in the first minute that he was on the court for Iowa in a game that mattered. And he either deflected a pass or nearly forced a turnover or something. And I was just like, there you go. He's going to affect the game on both sides of the floor.
He's got really good instincts too. I mean, you pointed this out on Twitter, just like a little small play. Like he made a great drive towards the bucket, and then rather than try like a difficult like finish at the rim, he dumped it off to a teammate that was right under the basket, and he had an easy layup. So like, he's already doing stuff like that. He has a really good understanding of the game, sees the floor well. So, you add that to like just that incredible athleticism, and like, yeah, that is a really, really fun package of ability that he's got. And I think he's a guy that I think Iowa fans are going to love watching this year for sure. And I think you mentioned this before too. Like, I expect him to be starting sooner rather than later, right? I mean, once the health and the cardio and the rust and whatever, like, maybe a few more games coming off the bench, but I think he's going to be in that starting lineup real soon.
I think so too. And I think that's going to benefit everybody, the second unit, the starters. I mean, and like if Riley Mulvey is actually serviceable this year, that's going to be beneficial for that lineup too. You have a big body and like just occupying as much space as a 7 footer like Riley Mulvey does affects the game, especially defensively. So, and he played pretty damn well the other night, and
He really
what, like
did.
8 minutes?
Yeah, if he can give Iowa like, 4 to 8, good to decent minutes off the bench to give, Freeman a break, That would be huge because that was one of the big questions we had coming into the season was what does Iowa do when Freeman is in foul trouble or just needs a breather or something? And that the depth at that five was real questionable. And yeah, I don't want to read too much into 8 minutes against South Dakota, but I was impressed with what Mulvey did, which was really good to see.
Those 4 to 8 minutes really could impact the way Iowa plays this season and how successful they are. Because when Freeman's off the floor, you can go to Mulvey, you can put Logi at the five, and just have a small like a medium lineup. If you have because you can put a big guard in there with Drew. You can have Drew, you can have Josh, you can have Peyton Sanford, you can have Seydou, you can have Logi. That's a still a fairly large lineup if you average things out, right? Um, and Seydou can obviously help in the post and stuff like that. It really gives Iowa a lot of options, and that way Logi can play a four and a five, and Seydou can play 2 through 4 more or less, and he can bring the ball up the floor. There's just a lot of options when this team is healthy, and of course Price can play a variety of positions. Peyton can play 3 and 4. If Mulvey can play and can play a lot, a lot for him, right? Not a lot, relatively, but like 8 minutes, like you mentioned, that's going to be really beneficial.
Yeah, you mentioned Peyton, and just a brief aside, like, they won that game over South Dakota comfortably, on the other night. And yet, that was a pretty bad game for Peyton Sanford standards. Like, he didn't score that much. He's in foul trouble. Like, he fouled out and he played barely 20 minutes, I think. Like, just super weird for a guy like him to have that many fouls and, only about 20 minutes of action. And so, like, that's a game, like, if that had happened last year, like, even against a team like South Dakota, I think Iowa would have been sweating that game last season. Like, it would have been hold your butts in the into that second half, like, ugh. And it was not the case. Like, the other guys stepped up and played really well. I mean, Dix was phenomenal, but Traore, Thelwell, um, Mulvey, Price, etc. Like, there's a lot of good guys.
First, the Murrays went to DME Academy.
There we go. It was an alphabet soup, but it wasn't the
Right.
wasn't the big one.
So you mentioned Josh Dix. I really think he's underrated. I said it to Fran in the post game, and he was like, "I don't know who's doing that. I'm not," and that was it. So, classic Fran answer
Yeah,
there at the end of the game. But with Peyton being a potential NBA draft pick this coming year, Owen Freeman being an awesome sophomore, probably one of the better bigs in the country and in the Big Ten, that leaves Josh Dix right there. And I think
you think that's going to help Dix get some really good looks because
he's
defenses are
really
going to
good.
be
He's
he's a
really good.
it's a really good player, but defenses are going to be keying on Peyton. I think he's going to be the first line in your defensive scout for Iowa. Freeman's obviously going to be right up there too because he's a skilled 7-footer. So you're going to have to focus on slowing him down. So if you're focused on those guys, if you're doubling one of them, like that's going to give Dix, I think, less attention defensively and hopefully more open looks. And yeah, I think he's poised for a really, really good season.
That I said this in the post game too. Uh, on Josh's final three that gave him 23 points. I think it was Brock hit him right in the shooting pocket. I sit next to Dallas Jones on press row, and I turned to Dallas and said, "That's good," and it went, it went in. He just has that type of stroke that every time he shoots it and he's relatively open, I think it's going to go in. So
It looks great.
he's really good. I don't know that he's the NBA future type of player. That's
Yeah, he's
that's to me.
gonna need to have some pretty good seasons the next couple of years. And the physical thing is just, I mean, he's not gonna get that much bigger, that much faster, et cetera. So that's always gonna put a ceiling on the NBA stuff for him.
But he could be really good at Iowa, and he's starting to
Absolutely.
really show that. He started to show that last year.
Yeah.
So really, really like his upside. Really like how he's playing right now.
I think the one lineup thing, going back just a second, you mentioned Thelwell. that's kind of the one open lineup spot I'm still really curious about because we think Traore is gonna get in there at the four, like we said, sooner rather than later. And obviously, Peyton and Dix and Freeman are locked in for sure. But that Thelwell, Brock Harding, at the point guard, I've really liked what Thelwell's given Iowa off the bench. The first few games of the season, like he just looks good. Like his shot's been good, his confidence, his maturity, the leadership he brings. You like bringing that off the bench for sure, but do you think do you think he starts at some point this season?
You know, this offseason, I would have said so, and maybe even a few games ago, I would have said so. Your five best players don't always start.
That's true.
I think he's really, really good in that second unit, and he's played more minutes than Brock in I think in these last two games. He definitely did against Southern.
Is he a guy that maybe is like that, the finishing lineup, the lineup that ends games,
I would say so, especially again once you get into the Big Ten conference. I would say
Yeah.
so. I think we're gonna learn Friday against Washington State is gonna be a big learning step for how Fran and wants to go about the lineup, and especially if assuming everybody's healthy. It's not going to be a telltale sign of the rest of the season, right? But it's going to be a step into us starting to figure out what he wants to do. And if anything, it's going to be that game in itself is going to be a step for Fran to learn because that's going to be their first real competition, right? Like,
Exactly. That's their first game against like high major-ish competition finally.
exactly.
So
Exactly. And I think Washington State went to the tournament last year and actually did pretty well, but I might be a different coach, probably a completely different roster. I
right.
haven't had the time to look yet, so I
Yeah.
need to do that before Friday. But um yeah, so I think we're gonna learn a lot. I think I've talked about it before. I think we talked about it last week when we did our basketball check-in too, but I really like Drew Thelwell too, man. Like the team has told us he's just a winner, and being the all-time winner at Morehead State is something that's a good mid to low major program that has made the tournament. I would probably call him mid-major. Um, but that's a good program that has done a lot. And Drew's a good player, man. I think he and Brock complement each other really well in terms of their skill sets and just in terms of their physical body type. Because Brock's a smaller guard, but Drew
Yeah.
is 6'3". And
Yeah.
they played together the other night too, so you can play them together
Yeah.
if you want to. If you want to play fast, yeah, go and go and put Drew and Brock in for sure. But and you can play a small ball lineup and roll with them too.
I think there wasn't a ton of excitement, for what Iowa did in the transfer portal, getting Thelwell and Traore, because obviously people don't watch a lot of Morehead State, didn't watch a lot of Manhattan. These guys are not coming from big splashy programs or anything. But they seem like two guys that are really good fits with Iowa. They seem like they both fit in with this roster really seamlessly, and they've provided a lot of what Iowa needed, on the court and off the court too, I'm sure. But so even though these weren't like the biggest, you know, splashiest transfer additions, it seems like Iowa really got guys that they wanted and guys that can be really effective and helpful for this team.
You know who was integral in getting both of those guys out of the portal on the staff? Tristan Spurlock.
Yeah.
I have given him his flowers in some of our articles, our premium stuff. Since he's been brought on staff, man, and been able to recruit since I think some NCAA rule changes is what allowed that. Man, that I think that's become an incredibly great, like it's a great hire by Frank, just straight up. Like Tristan gets it. Tristan knows how to talk to guys. He played for UCF in college, so he knows. He played overseas, like just been there, done that, can relate to guys, and I mean, he's got some other big recruits on campus. Mozzie Mosley would not have been on campus if it wasn't for Tristan Spurlock, and he ended up at LSU. But just getting a guy, I think he was a top 50 recruit for us on Rivals. Just getting a guy like that on campus is a win for Iowa in itself. Winters Grady was another one, but that was a Matt Gatens guy. But anyway, yeah. just continue to be impressed by what he's done. So I just needed to throw that in there and give him his due because he's been really good for the staff. Now, speaking of recruiting, not one of Spurlock's guys, but Iowa got a commitment just a couple days ago, and Badara Diakite has yet to sign. I think the signing window is a few days long. It might just be a clerical thing too, where they just need to get something figured out. But Badara Diakite does pick Iowa, committed the other day, going to be signing here shortly. Four-star power forward, number 127 recruit in the country for us. Listed as a center, but he's 6'9", so I would classify that as a forward. But originally from Mali, same as Chris Tajo, same as Laji Dembele, and then Seydou is originally from Ivory Coast. His family is. Seydou was born in New York, but his family's originally from Ivory Coast, which is they're all in West Africa. So I just think that's cool, adding that
Yeah,
level of international flavor. And having Logi and having Chris at Iowa probably added a level of comfortability that Badara maybe wouldn't have had otherwise. He moved here into the United States in 2020, so it's not fresh to him, but spending the
yeah,
majority of your life in a different country and then having a little bit of home where your new home is gonna be had to be impactful for him, but could be a bit of
absolutely.
a what'd you say?
I said absolutely. You would think that just having guys that can kind of understand his experiences a little bit better would be a huge boost, I would think.
Yeah, and I think what that does too is it allows Iowa to start to put some roots in international basketball recruiting. I mean, Chris is actually he spent some time in Montreal, Canada. He played for NBA Latin America, so he's known a bunch of languages. Logi just moved to the United States when he was 17, I think. And so lots of different stuff. Obviously, Seydou having that connection is interesting, but like he's an American citizen. He was born in New York City, so a little different there. But he's more of a New Yorker, I would say. But what do you know? I
Yeah.
don't know his familial background and stuff, but. I just think that's cool, and I think it's a great opportunity for Iowa basketball too to start getting guys like that might fly under the radar a little bit, even though Badara started off as a pretty highly coveted recruit. Um, could be a bit of a project. Could play right away. He's kind of a Chris Tajo in that sense, where you see it, but can he get on campus and put it together quickly? I think Chris is gonna play eventually and gonna be good. Just right now, still figuring it out. And that could be Badara next year too. He could come in and play quickly, but he is 6'9", I think 190. So gotta put on some weight. That's gonna be a focus for him.
His body type and just, watching some of his highlights, his game a little bit reminded me of Jared Uthoff at Iowa. Not the shooter that Uthoff was. He's going to have to work a ways to get to that, but just kind of, I mean, Uthoff had that long, really lanky body, and just kind of the way they moved, I thought seemed a little similar to me, very fluid. Really interesting skill set that Diakite has, but yeah, definitely got some work to do, I think, before he can, impact things against like Big Ten opponents.
Entering his senior year, so he'll have a whole year of work and potentially a red shirt. We'll see what happens in year one for him next season at Iowa. Still work to be done in the class of 2025 as well. We'll keep you posted. Keep our premium subscribers posted there at iowa.rivals.com/subscribe if you're not a subscriber yet. Be getting all that information there from.
Also, I mean, this was signing day, and it's like, oh, I only signed one guy, but it's like it's kind of a reflection of what a different world this is too. Like with the transfer portal, you're not filling up, your scholarships on signing day and getting everything locked in because you are going to want to have some available for the portal because that's a big way that you're going to get players at this point. So it's just a different way to do it. But yeah, I think that's probably part of the reason Iowa, only has one guy in that 2025 class so far for sure.
With Yes, good point. Iowa's going to be active in the portal once the year comes to an end. But with that in mind, Ross, do you want to talk about that 2025 recruiting class for the women? They just signed three. players, all of them really, really good for that matter. Highly rated recruits, Addie Deal, Layla Hayes, and Journey Houston. You just put an article together. That'll be in the description as well. But do you want to give us a quick rundown of them since we're talking about recruiting right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So Iowa, the women had a great recruiting class for 2025. They're adding three women to the squad, headlined by Addison Addie Deal, who is really phenomenal talent, the best recruit Iowa has picked up since Caitlin Clark chose Iowa out of Dowling Catholic back in 2020. Deal was She was a top five, top 10 recruit a little bit earlier in her career. I think she's settled right now into that 10 to 20 range from a lot of the services, but just a really excellent high ceiling, high level prospect, great shooter, excellent passer, good rebounder. She's the same size as Caitlin, both 6 foot guards, both really good ball handlers. So she's a girl that when she gets on campus, she's going to play from day one. I think Iowa fans are really going to love her once they get to see her play in black and gold. Her game is just fun, and she's able to impact the game in so many ways. So yeah, she's just a huge addition. Going to be really, really strong, and could be the start of even more big time recruits choosing Iowa. They're pursuing a lot of top targets in 2026 that would be great to supplement Deal with. In addition to Deal, Iowa's got Journey Houston and Layla Hayes. All three of them top 100 recruits per ESPN and Hoop Girls, one of the leading recruiting services for women's hoops. Houston was the first girl to commit to Iowa for 2025. She actually committed over a year ago, and she is also the most local of the three. Deal is from California, Hayes is from Alaska, and Houston is from down the road in Davenport. She was great her freshman and sophomore seasons. Had over 1,000 points combined in those 2 years. Really played well for Davenport North. Last year, season got cut short due to injury, so she wasn't able to do a lot. I did not play AAU ball either. So she's kind of getting back into the swing of things, but just a lot of talent there. She is another guard wing player, about 5'11", another good shooter, scorer. Just going to give Iowa another, really exciting and explosive weapon on the wing and in the guard position. And then Hayes was the most recent commit. She actually committed just a month ago. Iowa had a big official visit weekend with Deal and Houston and a couple other prospects. And Hayes, who was uncommitted at the time, she committed to Iowa on that trip in Iowa City. Surprised the coaches a little bit. Very happy surprise. She's a big 6'4", 6'5", again out of Alaska, so she's really coming from a long ways away. And she is, you're hoping she's the next in that getting to be a long and productive line of just really good Iowa post players. Obviously, going back to Megan Gustafson, who just, rewrote the Iowa record books until Caitlin Clark came along and rewrote them all again. But, she was excellent, developed into a National Player of the Year and just a tremendous low post scorer and weapon for Iowa. Monica Sinano replaced Gustafson down low, and she was great, all Big Ten for a couple years. Incredible touch, great finisher around the basket, just really good post skills. And now, Iowa's got Addie O'Grady and Hannah Stolke in those kind of post positions. And, again, just trying to just continue that legacy there. And Hayes looks like she could be the next one. Along with Ava Hayden, who's a freshman this year. She's a really skilled big. She won a state title in Alaska last year. Averaged a double-double, 17 points, 10, 11 rebounds. So yeah, just a really good skill set. And with what Iowa has been able to do in terms of coaching post players, Jan Jensen, now the head coach, when she was an assistant, like that was her specialty, was developing post players, and obviously did an incredible job. So you would expect that to still be an area of focus, obviously, with her as the head coach too. And so yeah, just another really strong possibility for Iowa, and just a really good recruiting class overall. Really helps combined with the class that they brought in this year, which also had several top 100 talents, and the targets that they're after in 2026. Like this program is really getting some really strong high level talent, and it's really exciting for what they're could be able to do as they the Caitlin Clark era was incredible. It's over. She's with the Fever now, but Iowa is, really bringing in players that should be able to help them compete at a high level for the next several years.
How good do you have to be for the top programs in the country to find you in Alaska?
You got to be really good because you're not sending scouts out to Alaska on a whim. That's for sure. That is a hike. God bless the internet. Back in the day, who knows where she would have been playing because nobody would have seen her. But you can just throw up some highlights on Huddle now, and it's a lot easier to get your name out. Thankfully,
Probably would have ended up in Canada or something, right? Like,
yeah, yeah. I don't
I
even
don't
know what colleges in Alaska play Division I basketball.
I
I
don't
mean,
think any of them do
maybe
they?
none because the travel would be so
Right.
insane. Yeah,
Right. Like, and if they do play D1 ball, I don't think they do, but I know there's like some D2 programs up there or like D3 or NI. They have to all play each other,
right.
right? Like, and that's it.
Yeah,
With the occasional maybe California or Oregon or Washington school coming up for funsies or something. But
right.
anyway, women's basketball just beat the shit out of Toledo last night. Ross, you covered that game as well, but like where I'm at with the women's basketball team and what I've been able to watch of them is like, how are they not ranked? They have to be ranked in this next updated AP poll, right?
Yeah, I mean, I understood it a little bit starting the season. They lost Clark, they lost Gabby, they lost Kate Martin, they lost Molly Davis. Like there's a ton of lost production they were going to have to replace. So you had question marks. Understandable. All right, through 3 games now, they have answered those questions with tremendous answers. Like they have been just blasting teams. And yeah, a couple of them not so great, but Virginia Tech, solid, really solid ACC team, tourney team, and Iowa handled them on Sunday. Just destroyed Toledo. They went on a 23-2 run, I think, last night in the first quarter, and never looked back. That was 28-10 after one. They had a 20-some point lead at halftime. It got up to 40 points in the second half. Like they were just throttling Toledo. A lot of balance on the roster. That's the big difference, I think, that I've seen from this season versus last year. Was obviously last year is the Caitlin Clark show. You've got the greatest scorer in college basketball history. Get her the ball and let her cook, and she cooked. You don't have Clark, so now you're going to have to rely on a more balanced approach. And they've got a lot of girls that can score, a lot of girls that can play well. Lucy Olson is really good. The Villanova transfer, Hannah Stolke. Sydney Folter's healthy and getting back into the swing. She looks great. Um, I'm drawing blanks now. But Taylor McCabe had 4 threes last night. Freshman class, Ava Hayden, Taylor Strimlow, Tegan Mulaney, uh, giving them some good minutes. Like they had like 9 players, I think, score at least 5 points. 6 players in double figures, 5 players in double figures. Just really great balance. And yeah, it's like rank them. Come on, this is ridiculous. I don't know how you can watch them and say, oh, they're not one of the 25 best teams in the country right now. Like, come on.
Exactly. Exactly. Right there with you and everything that I've seen from them and what they're able to do and how deep they are and Lucy Olson stepping up big time. It's just do the right thing. Okay. We'll wrap it up here. We appreciate you tuning into this episode of HawkCast brought to you by iowawithout If you're not a premium subscriber yet, you can do that today. iowithout.rivals.com/subscribe. We'd love to have you. Join us on our board. Get all the premium content as well. Don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube. Drop a like, drop a comment, let us know what you're thinking. that Iowa's quarterback situation, men's basketball, Seydou, women's basketball ought to be ranked, right? Tell us about it in the comments and let us know. And if you're listening on Apple Podcast, Spotify, drop that rate and review. Helps us out a ton. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss an episode. For now, I am Elliot Clough at Elliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder, and we will see you next time.